A Ferengi Among the Pashtuns, Charles Masson's Journey Through Marwat, Bannu, Kohat and Hangu, circa 1832 to 1833. 1. Introduction. The Reluctant Ethnographer. When Charles Masson, the pseudonym of James Lewis, a deserter from the East India Company's Bengal artillery turned antiquarian and explorer, crossed from the town of Tak into the low, scrub-covered hills separating the Indus Plains from the Marwat country, he was entering a world that had already been shaped by more than a millennium of invasion, resistance, migration, and accommodation. The armies of the Umayyad Caliphate had pushed through these very valleys in the 8th century, marching from Multan toward Ghazni. The legions of Timur had watered their horses in the Kurram River during their devastating campaign of 1398. More recently, Ranjit Singh's Sikh Khalsa had ridden to Laki with 25,000 men, taken 30,000 rupees in tribute, and then, wisely as it turned out, thought better of permanent occupation. And now here was a lone European, a Ferengi, a Christian, walking alone into villages whose names remain familiar to this day: Tank, Kulachi, Draban, Laki Marwat, Bannu, Hangu, Kohat. What makes Masson's account extraordinary is not merely his eye for landscape, though that is considerable and often beautiful, but his persistent, almost puzzled honesty about the people he encounters. He arrived expecting ferocity. He had been warned so thoroughly that even faquirs, mendicants, were deterred from entering the Marwat and Bannu regions that he half expected to be murdered before he had crossed the first pass. Instead, he found villagers who declared, with apparent sincerity, that Jesus Christ, Hazrat Isa, was an Asil Patan, a genuine Pashtun. He found men who fetched cool water from the shade for a tired stranger, who cut his fingernails and shampooed his legs against his will, who pressed bread and buttermilk upon him, who shook his hand warmly and greeted him with the Pashto phrase, Ukala Ratsi, you are welcome. He could not reconcile the fearsome reputation with the daily reality. Rather than forcing the evidence to fit a preconceived theory, he recorded both. That tension between expectation and experience, between the colonial gaze and the human encounter, is what gives these chapters their enduring value. This essay provides a detailed analysis of chapters 6 and 7 of Masson's narrative of various journeys in Balochistan, Afghanistan, and the Punjab, 1842, Volume 1, focusing on his route, his observations on Pashtun society, the historical layers he uncovers, the political conditions he navigates, and the methodological strengths and limitations of his account. It integrates Masson's own text with broader historical and archaeological knowledge, and reads his journey from the perspective of the ground he traversed. 2. The route. Tracing Masson's footsteps from Tak to Peshawar. Masson begins chapter 6 in the town of Tak, located in the Dera Ismail Khan region on the western bank of the Indus. He deliberately rejects the more common and ostensibly safer route to Peshawar, which followed the Indus northward to Kalabagh, famous for its salt mines, then through Shakardara to Kohat in Bangash. This latter route had the advantage of passing through Isakel, whose chief, Ahmed Khan, was known for his great predilection for Feringis. Instead, Masson chooses the unfrequented and notoriously dangerous route through Marwat and Bannu. His reasons are partly temperamental. He has grown confident in his ability to move among rude tribes, and partly strategic. He has learned that concealing his identity as a European is less effective than avowing it openly. The route he follows can be reconstructed in some detail. Stage 1. Tak to Kundi. Leaving Tak in the evening, Masson walks 5 or 6 miles northward to a village where he takes shelter from rain. The next morning, after a march of 4 or 5 kosses, roughly 8 to 10 miles, a koss varies but is generally about 2 miles, he clears the villages dependent on Tak and moves directly across country toward a visible break in the encircling hills. Warned by reapers that he will infallibly be murdered if he proceeds alone, he turns westward toward a small town and fort called Kundi. On the way, a man draws his sword, mistaking Masson for a Sikh. Upon learning he is a Feringhi, the man immediately sheathes his weapon, embraces him, and leads him to a village for hospitality. At Kundi, Masson finds a garrison of 100 men, the town being a frontier post against Bannu marauders, and meets a Syed from Peshawar who agrees to let him travel with his party. Stage 2. Kundi to the Marwat Plain. The party departs early, accompanied by a guide. After about 7 kosses, they reach the mouth of a pass through low hills. The guide refuses to go further, fearing for his safety. The pass itself is wide and convenient. Midway are natural wells or rock cavities where men and women fill massaks, skins, with water, transporting them by donkey and bullock to villages 5 or 6 kosses away on the Marwat Plain. From the summit of the last hill, an extensive burial ground, Masson beholds the plains of Marwat and Bannu spread before him. Numerous villages, marked by their several groups of trees, the yellow tints of the ripe cornfields, and the fantastic forms of the surrounding mountains. In the distance, the Sefid Saft Ko range appears in pure whiteness diversified by streaks of azure, red and pearly grey under an unclouded sky. He is lost in wonder, then laments that the villainy of man should make a hell where the Creator had designed a paradise. Stage 3. Across Marwat to Laki and Bannu. Descending to the plain, the party passes several villages, then reaches a larger settlement where they halt during the oppressive heat of the day. Masson is lodged in the masjid, mosque, given a chaharpahi, cot, to rest on, and supplied with bread and milk. The village barber cuts his fingernails and toes, and the villagers shampoo him until he begs for rest. In the afternoon, they continue to Laki, a town on the Kuram River, then knee-deep in what Masson believes is May, with a modest bazaar and a fort that does not merit the name. The local Malik, chief, entertains them with fowls and pilau. The next morning, with a mounted guide, they cross the Kuram and ascend the opposite plain, traversing a barren, uninhabited expanse of about 10 kosses dotted with stunted mimosa bushes. They pass muddy water holes, encounter 6 or 7 armed robbers who do not attack, respecting the Sayyad's sanctity, and then recross the Kuram, now rapid and shallow over a stony bed, onto cultivated ground. They enter Naga, a walled town of tolerable size with a bazaar and many Hindu merchants. The young Malik of Nagar, dressed gaily in silks, brings musicians and falconers, asks Masson for a written charm, and accepts a scribbled scrap from the Sayyad instead. A dispute over a horse, recognised as stolen by its branded numbers and a cross called the Feringhi horse, detains them for 2 days. Stage 4. Across Bannu into the hills. Resuming the journey, they pass through a well-cultivated country where nearly every individual greets them with a cordial handshake and Ukala Razi. Masson notes with surprise that, if implacable abroad, the Pashtuns were possessed of urbanity at home. Every house outside the towns is a fortified castle. Small copses of mulberry, plum and vines surround the habitations. Water is plentiful, carried by countless canals. At a larger town, an older, wiser Malik urges Masson to stay and rest his blistered feet, promising a goat every day for food and asking Masson to teach his men to shoot accurately at a target. After a day's rest, the party proceeds towards the hills, guided by a mounted escort and accompanied by a small horse presented to the Sayyad. Stage 5. The hills Kafakot and Hangu. Chapter 7 opens in the hills, where the party finds capacious reservoirs of excellent water. They ascend and descend mountains of great elevation, passing a few miserable Vaziri huts in watercourses. Masson notes that the Vaziris, though notorious robbers, regard Sayyads with awe and a feeling of respectful reverence. As daylight fades, they pass around the brow of a hill and see, on a much higher summit opposite, a series of walls. Kafakot, the infidels' fortress. Masson is frustrated that he cannot stop to examine it properly. From this point, after a night march of 24 kosses, nearly 50 miles, they reach a village, occupy the masjid, and receive a repast of rice from the Malik in exchange for a taviz, charm. The Bannu guide takes his leave, saying the people here are his enemies. The next morning, they cross 3 successive ranges of considerable altitude, well wooded, with wild pomegranates and other fruit trees. They enter a large valley, halt near weavers who provide cakes of wari, sorghum, flour. Then proceed to a village called Ahmed Koza, which has a small bazaar. After another march, they descend upon Hangu, a town of about 300 houses set in a recess of the hills, with numerous orchards of vines, apples, plums, peaches, and 2 varieties of mulberry, common and shatut or royal. Fine springs issue from the rocks, forming a rivulet that winds toward Kohat. Stage 6. Hangu, Kohat, and the pass to Peshawar. Masson is hosted by Sadhu Khan, a son of Nawab Samad Khan of Kabul, a well-bred Durrani chief who is devout but addicted to kimia, alchemy. Within days, news arrives of a hostile force approaching from Peshawar. Sadhu Khan evacuates Hangu, retreating with his family and property to Kabul. Masson, his feet still painful, cannot follow. He proceeds up the valley toward Kohat, passing through beautiful scenery, mulberry trees, villages, springs, gardens. At a village called Lo, a Sayyad makes him his guest, hoping the Ferengi knows alchemical secrets. He meets a reconnoitring party from the Peshawar army, then a second party under Faisal Khan, whose men search him roughly and tear his shirt. He is brought before Pir Muhammad Khan, the youngest of the 4 Peshawar Sirdars, who ignores him at first, but later offers him a seat on his elephant. Shakur Khan, a cousin of the Sirdars and a renowned soldier, treats him kindly, and the son of Abdul Wahab Khan, recently returned from Ludhiana, where he served the exiled king Suja al-Mulk, takes him as his guest. Masson proceeds to Kohat, a walled town on an eminence with a dilapidated citadel, a considerable bazaar, and a reputation for manufacturing rifle barrels. The principal mosque has baths fed by springs from the rock. He notes a curiosity: a mango tree fruiting alongside apple and walnut trees, a botanical boundary line. The province of Kohat, with Hangu as a dependency, belongs to Nawab Samad Khan. The revenue from Kohat is said to be 80,000 rupees, from Hangu 20,000. After a second stay in Kohat, where he is rejoined by an old acquaintance, Syed Muhammad, who embraces his feet in joy, Masson finally departs for Peshawar. He crosses a mountain pass, is briefly detained by an idiot who wants his cap and slaps him, then meets Syed Muhammad again, who puts him on a horse. The Peshawar army marches urgently because Syed Ahmed Shah, the renowned or notorious religious leader, has moved on Hashnagar, 10 or 11 kosses from Peshawar. Masson rides an elephant through the night, covering 24 kosses, and reaches Peshawar by morning. He is lodged at the Gurkha tree, an old fortified serai. 3. The people, Marwat, Bannu, Waziri, and the texture of daily life. Masson's greatest contribution is his detailed, ground-level ethnography of Pashtun tribal society in the early 19th century. He is not content with generalizations about ferocity or fanaticism. He describes what he sees, eats, sleeps on and endures. Marwat and Bannu, contrast and character. Masson distinguishes carefully between the inhabitants of Marwat and those of Bannu, even though they share the same plain. The Marwati wears coarse white linen, in much the same manner as the Pathans on the banks of the Indus. His villages are cleanly, his manner rude, yet frank and manly. The Banuchi, by contrast, wears dark clothing and ornamental lungis, turbans, assimilating with the mountain tribes. He is smaller in stature, an odd but likely accurate observation, and remarkable for his esprit de paix, his love of country. Masson quotes them, "My own dear Bannu." He finds this local patriotism in a stateless society genuinely striking. The social structure is segmentary and decentralized. There is no single authority in Marwat. Each village is governed by its own Malek, and the Maleks combine only for common defense against invasion or other existential threats. In Bannu, authority is similarly vested in respective Maleks, some of whom, those in towns, maintain paid followers from revenue extracted from Hindu merchants. But outside the towns, every occupant of a fort is his own master, while he neither pays tribute nor acknowledges submission to anyone. Masson recognizes the logic of this system. The system of equality, while productive of more or less internal commotion, is admirably effective when circumstances call for mutual exertion, and all parties, laying aside their private animosities, in such cases, heartily unite in defence of the public freedom, in the advantages of which all participate. He has, in effect, described the classic Pashtun jirga system and the concept of nung, honour, as the basis of collective action, hospitality, melmastia, as social law. Again and again, Masson benefits from Pashtun hospitality. In the first village he enters, the Sayyid's declaration about Jesus ensures a hearty reception. A fire is kindled so his features can be observed. The village's best food is produced in such quantities that he must cry quarter. In another village, he is lodged in the masjid, given a cot, supplied with bread and milk, shampooed, and his nails cut. The Malek of the larger Bannu town wants him to stay indefinitely, promising a goat daily. Even when he is searched roughly by Faizullah Khan's men, the leader expresses regret that his shirt was torn and orders him treated decently. Masson is genuinely puzzled. How to reconcile this daily cordiality with the reputation for ferocity? He concludes, provisionally, that the same people who are implacable abroad are possessed of urbanity at home. Hindu banyas and economic life. Masson notes the presence of Hindu merchants in every village and town. In Marwat, there are 2 or 3 Hindu banyas per village. In Naga, the number of Hindus suggests a pretty large bazaar. The Hindus in the 2 towns he visited were too cheerful to allow me to suppose that they were harshly treated or that they lived in insecurity. This is an important corrective to assumptions of universal persecution. The Hindu mercantile community appears to have been integrated into the tribal economy, paying taxes, mal, to local Maleks in exchange for protection and the right to trade, agriculture and water management. Masson provides a comparative agricultural sketch. Marwat relies on wheat, the only grain he notes, goats as principal stock, and horses that are few. The great evil of Marwat is the lack of a due supply of water. Crops depend on rain, with bands, mounds, constructed to collect and divert water. Domestic water is brought from long distances. Rain pools are reserved for cattle. Bannu, by contrast, has great advantages in a large extent of fertile soil and in an abundant supply of water, which can be turned with facility upon the lands. The Bannu plain produces wheat, rice, mung, a little sugar cane, and zirchob, turmeric, a foreign introduction. There are many date groves, regarded, perhaps justly, in these countries as evidences of fertility, because they indicate the presence of water. Cattle are plentiful, and the inhabitants, in all kinds of rural wealth, may be pronounced rich. Pasture land is so abundant that the Bannu people can allow Vaziri nomads to graze their flocks and horses without inconvenience. Manufactures and trade. Every village in Marwat and Bannu has weavers of coarse cotton, karbas. In the towns of Bannu, there are looms for finer cotton and silk goods, particularly lunghis. The towns also carry on a considerable traffic and nearly engross that with the mountain Vaziris. Masson sees the towns as feeble vestiges of the past rather than creations of recent days, relics of a time when Bannu was more populous and better governed, when the high road from Kabul to India passed through it. 4. The role of Sayyads, holiness as passport and economy. One of the most interesting threads in both chapters is the role of Sayyads, descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. Masson treats them with a mixture of respect, irony, and practical appreciation. He understands that they trade charms for hospitality, a taviz, a scrap of paper with scribbled prayers, for a night's lodging, a meal, a guide. He notes that conferring charms and antidotes against accidents and diseases is one of the means employed by Sayyids and others to impose upon the credulity of the ignorant, who, however, are very willingly imposed upon. But he also sees their practical utility in a stateless environment. The Peshawar Sayyad he travels with, an agent of Sultan Muhammad Khan, though also involved with the pugnacious Syed Ahmed Shah, provides protection through the Vaziri Hills. The Vaziris, although notorious robbers, in common with other lawless tribes, regard the descendants of their prophet with awe and a feeling of respectful reverence. They consider themselves fortunate to receive Sayyad benedictions. Even the Malik of Naga accepts a scribbled charm from the Sayyad with reverence. The most revealing episode concerns Mir Kamaruddin, a fakir whose messengers Masson dismisses. Later in Peshawar, he learns that Mir Kamaruddin was a highly respected pir, spiritual guide, who had been very useful to the British explorer William Moorcroft. The Vaziris were his morids, disciples, and looked up to him as their spiritual guide. He was making his annual progress among them to receive offerings and dues. The son of the Mir tells Masson, with gentle reproach, that he lost an excellent opportunity of visiting the Vaziris under the protection of his father, that I might have seen what no Feringhi had ever seen, and have filled my book with extraordinary things. Masson consoles himself with the thought that whatever is best, but the regret is palpable. He had walked past a door that almost no European had ever seen opened. 5. Historical layers, Arabs, Timur, Ranjit Singh, and the deep past. Masson is not merely a travel writer, he is an amateur historian with a sense of deep time. He explicitly situates his journey within a longer history of invasion and movement. The Caliphate armies. He notes that the armies of the caliphs had clearly advanced through Bannu and Kuram upon Ghazni, then, it would appear, the capital of the country. He identifies Hurriyu, modern Hariab in Kuram, as the site of a great battle between the Prince of Ghazni and the Muslim invaders. This is remarkably precise. The Umayyad and Abbasid forces did indeed push through the Gamal Pass and the Kuram Valley into the Ghazni region in the 8th and 9th centuries. Timur's expedition. Masson recalls that 3 or 4 centuries ago, the high road, followed from Kabul to India, led through Bannu, as we find in the history of Timur's expedition. Timur's invasion of 1398 did indeed follow a route through Bannu and the Kuram Valley before crossing the Indus. Ranjit Singh. More recently, Maharaja Ranjit Singh once marched with an army of 25,000 men to Laki on the Kuram River. He exacted 30,000 rupees, but did not judge it prudent or convenient to make a permanent settlement in the country, as it is said he had contemplated. This likely refers to an expedition in the late 1820s or early 1830s, within living memory of Masson's informants. The Sikhs had probed the frontier and withdrawn, leaving the local power structure intact, the vestiges of ancient prosperity. Masson sees the towns of Bannu as survivors of an earlier, more prosperous era. It is more natural to consider them as feeble vestiges of the past than as creations of recent days. This is an astute observation. The Bannu Basin had indeed been a transit corridor for millennia, supporting larger populations and more complex polities before the political fragmentation of the 18th and 19th centuries. 6. Kohat, the infidels' fortress. Masson sees Kohat only from a distance, passing around the brow of a hill while there is still daylight. He is frustrated. He would have liked to stay and examine it, but the fear of losing my company prevented me. He describes a series of walls on a much higher summit, with rocks below so arranged that he cannot tell whether the peculiarity of structure was the effect of art or of the sportive hand of nature. He is sceptical of the name. Kohat, or the infidels' fortress, he writes, and notes that a line of massive wall, wherever found, is styled by the present inhabitants of these regions Kohat, or Killer Kafa, equivalent and general terms which, in most instances, ill explain the nature of the remains of antiquity on which they are conferred. He suspects that most such sites are not fortresses at all, but sepulchral localities of bygone races. He finds it inconceivable that large towns and fortresses should have been fixed in such remote and sequestered sites. This is a valuable corrective. The tendency of both local tradition and colonial archaeology was to see walls and assume defence. Masson more cautiously asks, what if these are graves? What if the infidel being commemorated is not a defeated enemy, but an ancestor from a different faith? He does not settle the question, but he raises it with intelligence. What is the present status of Kohat? The site, also spelled Kohat, lies in what is now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, near the border of Bannu and Laki Marwat districts, in a remote hilly area. It consists of 2 fortified mounds with substantial stone masonry. Archaeological surveys have generally attributed it to the Hindu Shahi period, circa 9th to 11th centuries CE, though some elements may be earlier. The site has never been extensively excavated. It is not a tourist destination. It is remote, partially collapsed, occasionally visited by archaeology students, local historians, or intrepid travellers. The name persists, but Masson's suspicion that many Kohat sites are sepulchral has some support, though Kohat itself does show clear defensive features, including towers and walls. It remains one of the most enigmatic pre-Islamic monuments in the region. 7. Political conditions. The Barakzai family feud. Masson arrives in Kohat and Hangu at a moment of acute political fracture within the Barakzai dynasty. The Sirdars of Kandahar and Peshawar, jealous of the prosperity and growing power of their brother Dost Muhammad Khan at Kabul, have concerted a plan to attack him on either side. The Peshawar army was to march on Jalalabad while the Kandahar army advanced on Ghazni. As a preliminary move, Pir Muhammad Khan has seized Kohat and Hangu from Nawab Samad Khan, their own brother, because the opportunity was too tempting to be neglected. Sadhu Khan, the son of Nawab Samad Khan, calls it a most flagitious business. Masson is caught in the middle. He is a guest of Sadhu Khan when the invasion comes. Sadhu evacuates, retreating to Kabul with his family, property, and 2 or 3 elephants. Masson, his feet still painful, cannot follow. He meets the invading force, is searched, is ignored, then is offered a horse and money to go to Kabul. The mood changes not because Masson has changed, but because the political calculation has changed. This is the great lesson of his account. In a world without stable states, the traveller is at the mercy of every shift in local power. A man who is a suspect one day is a guest the next, not because of anything he has done, but because the army has moved and the threat has passed. Masson also notes the precarious position of the Shia minority. The inhabitants of the villages between Hangu and Kohat are principally Shias, as are all the tribes of the Turis, their neighbours, although not so bigoted as these. The Turis are very particular and ask strangers if they are straight or crooked, placing the forefinger to the forehead vertically for Shia, contorted for Sunni. If desirous to be civilly received, the stranger had better reply that he is straight. This is a vivid ethnographic detail, and it suggests that sectarian identity was already a significant marker of tribal affiliation in the early 19th century. 8. The minerals and natural resources of Kohat Masson provides a brief but interesting note on the mineral resources of the Kohat region. Indifferent coal is found generally on the surface, the country being included in the Great Coal Formation, which, whatever may be its value, evidently extends for some distance west of the Indus in these latitudes. He is cautious. I fear the mountainous character of the country about Kohat, and thence to the Indus, will scarcely authorize the hope that this useful mineral will ever be found, but in veins too thin to repay the labor of extracting it. He notes that coal may be in greater quantity at Kanigoram, where it is found in conjunction with iron that is constantly worked. He has also procured specimens of asbestos, said to occur in veins parallel with the coal strata at Kanigoram. Jet and other bituminous products are also brought from the neighbourhood of Kohat, as well as fluid bitumen, or mumia. He mentions reports of lapis lazuli, or a stone resembling it, and indications of copper in the rocks between Kohat and Hangu. This is a remarkably prescient observation. The Kohat Basin is indeed part of a significant geological formation, and coal mining would later develop in the region, though transport remains a challenge. 9. Methodology, strengths and limitations of Masson's account. Masson is not a perfect observer. His Pashto is weak. I could understand little of what he said, his dialect being Pashto. He relies on interpreters, on Persian, which he likely knew better, and on context. He generalizes from limited encounters. One village's hospitality becomes, the inhabitants of the villages were orderly and peaceable. His colonial frame shows through. He calls Vaziri huts miserable, describes the villainy of man in a paradise, and uses terms like lawless tribes without fully exploring the internal logics of raiding as an economic and political strategy. He barely mentions women. The only significant female figure in these chapters is the woman who recognizes him as a Ferengi from his cap and laughs. The recognition was productive only of a little innocent mirth. Otherwise, the social world he describes is entirely male. We learn nothing about Pashtun women's lives, labour or status. He also misses or minimises the role of raiding as a form of economic redistribution. He sees the Vaziris as notorious robbers, but does not ask why they raid, or how raiding relates to pastoralism and the harsh mountain environment. He does not explore the concept of badal, revenge, as a structuring principle of Pashtun social order. Despite these limitations, Masson's account is remarkably sympathetic for its time. He humanizes Pashtun communities, praises their hospitality and manliness, and acknowledges their love of country. He recognizes that the system of decentralized authority, while prone to internal feuds, is effective for collective defense. He does not advocate for British conquest or colonization. He simply describes what he sees with a degree of honesty that is sometimes uncomfortable, as when he admits his regret about Mir Kamaruddin. He is a traveller, not a conqueror. 10. Conclusion. The value of Masson's narrative for the modern reader. What does Charles Masson offer us nearly 2 centuries later? He offers a ground-level view of Pashtun society in the early 19th century, recorded by a man who walked through it alone, with no escort, no army, no diplomatic mission. He ate their bread, slept in their mosques, let them cut his nails and shampoo his legs. He was searched and insulted, and then, when they understood who he was, treated with a cordiality that continued to surprise him. He shows us a world of fortified houses and hospitality, of feud and collective action, of Sayyad charms and Vaziri robbers, of wheat fields and date groves, of coal outcroppings and ancient ruins. He shows us a world that had survived the caliphates, Timur, the rise and fall of the Durrani Empire, and the probing raids of Ranjit Singh, and would soon face the coming of the British. He shows us the resilience of a social order based not on the state, but on honour, hospitality, and the segmentary lineage. And he shows us something else, the possibility of genuine encounter across the chasm of culture and religion. Masson is a Christian, a Ferengi, a man who eats what they consider unclean. And yet, again and again, they welcome him. They declare Jesus a Pashtun. They fetch him water. They shake his hand and say, Urkala Razi. He does not fully understand them. His Pashto is weak. His framework is colonial. But he records them with a fidelity that allows us today to see them as they were. That is the enduring gift of Masson's narrative. It is not a perfect account, but it is an honest one. And in the study of a region too often reduced to headlines about conflict and terror, that honesty is more valuable than any number of grand theories. Masson walked the ground. He talked to the people. He wrote down what he saw. We are in his debt. Appendix, selected glossary. Asil, genuine, authentic, Pashto/Arabic. Banya, Hindu merchant. Chaharpahi, a cot or charpoy. Kos, variable unit of distance, roughly 2 miles. Darbar, court or formal assembly. Ferengi, European from Frank. Hudra, guest house or meeting place for men. Wari, sorghum, Yowar. Karbas, coarse cotton cloth. Killer/, cot, fort or fortress. Kimia, alchemy. Lungi, turban or headcloth. Malik, chief or headman. Masjid, mosque. Masak, waterskin, usually goatskin. Melmastia, Pashtun hospitality. Morid, disciple of a Sufi peer. Mumia, bitumen or natural asphalt. Munshi, secretary or scribe. Nung, honour, core Pashtun value. Pir, spiritual guide or Sufi master. Sayyad, descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. Shatut, royal mulberry. Taviz, charm or amulet, usually a folded paper with Quranic verses. Ukala Razi, you are welcome. Pashto. Vakil, agent or representative. Zerchob, turmeric, literally yellow wood.